The restaurant was buzzing with the usual noise of clinking glasses, hurried footsteps, and the faint smell of expensive food drifting through the air. But hidden beneath that glamorous setting, something darker was taking place. A young waitress named Anna had just started her very first shift. She wasn't looking for much, only a way to earn enough money to pay her bills and support her sick mother. She walked in with hope, nervous but determined to make a fresh start. What she didn't expect was to step straight into the path of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, a man feared for his arrogance and worshipped for his wealth. The CEO, Richard Hale, wasn't just any businessman. He was the head of a multi-billion-dollar empire that controlled restaurants, hotels, and luxury brands across the city. People whispered his name with respect, but behind those whispers was fear. Richard was known for treating employees like disposable pieces in his game of power. To him, people weren't human, they were tools. And when Anna's shaky hand spilled a drop of water near his table, he saw an opportunity to remind everyone in the room who held the power. The entire dining hall fell silent as Richard leaned back in his chair, smirking. The eyes of wealthy guests and anxious staff turned toward Anna, who stood frozen, clutching the empty tray against her chest. What happened next made hearts sink. Richard's cruel demand left Anna trembling, humiliated in front of strangers. It wasn't just a show of authority. It was his way of crushing anyone who dared look weak. For Anna, the humiliation burned deep, but so did something else, a spark of quiet defiance. That night, Anna cried, but not out of defeat. She had seen who Richard really was, the mask behind his empire, the cruelty that no headline or glossy magazine cover would ever show. And while most people might have walked away, broken and silenced, Anna made a different choice. She wasn't going to be just another victim of his power. She began to plan, piece by piece, how to turn her shame into strength. By morning, the same CEO who laughed at her the night before had no idea what was coming. He had spent years building his $2 billion empire, but he never once considered that someone as ordinary as a waitress could be the one to take it all away. What Anna uncovered about Richard and his empire would shake the city, destroy reputations, and leave even his closest allies questioning everything they knew. The story that follows isn't just about money or power, it's about human dignity, about how far someone can go when pushed to the edge. Anna may have entered that restaurant as a frightened young woman desperate for a job, but what she became afterward no one could have predicted. And as her plan began to unfold, Richard Hale was about to learn a lesson that his wealth could never protect him from. But here's the real question. How could a single waitress bring down a $2 billion empire overnight? The answer lies in the shocking events that followed. And once you hear what Anna did next, you'll realize this was only the beginning. Anna barely slept that night. The images of the crowded dining hall, the hush of voices, and Richard's cold smirk replayed again and again in her mind. She had thought this new job might finally give her a chance to breathe, to escape the crushing weight of overdue bills and the fear of losing her mother's medication. Instead, her first day had left her in tears, humiliated in front of people who laughed at her pain. But as she sat at the small kitchen table in her cramped apartment, staring at a single light bulb flickering above her, something inside her shifted. The humiliation had hurt, but it had also awakened something stronger, a determination she had never felt before. She remembered her mother's words from years ago, whispered when life was at its hardest. They can take away your pride for a moment, but they can't touch your spirit unless you let them. Anna held on to those words like a lifeline. If Richard Hale thought she was just another powerless waitress he could use as a prop for his ego, he was wrong. She might not have money or connections or influence, but she had something far more dangerous. She had the truth, and she knew where to find it. The restaurant where Anna worked wasn't just a fine dining spot. It was part of Richard's chain, one of the crown jewels of his empire. Every guest who walked in wasn't just paying for food. They were paying for the image Richard had built, the illusion of perfection. But illusions are fragile. Anna had overheard whispers from other staff about shady accounting, strange late-night meetings, and managers who seemed terrified to speak out. At first, she thought it was just gossip, but now she began to wonder, What if Richard's empire wasn't as flawless as it seemed? The next day, Anna returned to work with her uniform pressed and her face calm, but her heart was racing. She wasn't here just to serve tables anymore. She was here to watch, to listen, to learn. Every shift became a puzzle. She noticed how certain VIP guests were always seated in private rooms, how envelopes discreetly exchanged hands, and how the restaurant manager avoided eye contact whenever Richard's name was mentioned. Anna realized she had stumbled into something much bigger than workplace cruelty. And Richard, sitting comfortably in his office miles away, had no idea. To him, she was forgotten already, just a girl who had been put in her place. That arrogance blinded him. He didn't notice the way Anna lingered near conversations, how she quietly remembered every detail, how she began asking careful questions without drawing suspicion. With every small piece of information she was building a map, one that led straight to the cracks in his empire. But Anna also knew she was walking a dangerous path. Richard Hale wasn't a man who forgave betrayal. His empire wasn't worth billions by accident. It was built on intimidation, secrets, and people too afraid to fight back. If he ever discovered what she was doing, her life could become far worse than humiliation in a dining room. Yet Anna couldn't stop. Every injustice she witnessed only fueled her fire. Late at night when she returned home, she would spread scraps of paper across her table. Notes, overheard conversations, times and names. The story was slowly taking shape, and it was uglier than she imagined. The empire everyone admired was nothing more than a fragile house of cards, and Richard was its proud architect. What Anna didn't know yet was that she wasn't the only one watching Richard. Others, hidden in the shadows, were waiting for someone brave enough to make the first move. And Anna, unknowingly, had just lit the match that could burn it all down. But how could a young woman, armed only with determination and fragments of secrets, ever stand against a billionaire with endless power? That question lingered like smoke in the air, and the answer was still waiting to unfold. Anna's shifts at the restaurant became a balancing act between doing her job and quietly piecing together the puzzle no one else dared to touch. On the surface, she carried trays, smiled politely, and kept her head low, just another waitress blending into the background. But inside, her mind was racing. Every glance between managers, every hurried phone call in the corner, every guest who slipped through the back entrance, it all told her that Richard Hale's empire wasn't just built on business. It was built on secrets, and secrets could be dangerous. One evening, while clearing glasses from a private table, Anna overheard a conversation that made her pulse quicken. A man in a tailored suit leaned close to the restaurant's general manager, whispering about moving funds before the audit, and keeping Richard's name out of it. The words hung in the air like a heavy shadow. Anna kept her face calm as she carried the tray away, but her thoughts spiraled. An audit meant investigations. Moving funds meant something was being hidden. She scribbled the details on her notepad later, her hands shaking as she realized this wasn't just arrogance, it was corruption. But Anna wasn't the only one noticing things. Among the staff was Miguel, a quiet dishwasher who had worked in the restaurant for years. He was older, with tired eyes that had seen too much. One night, as Anna stayed late to clean, he approached her cautiously. "You're watching them, aren't you?" he asked in a low voice. She froze, unsure if she should deny it, but the look in his eyes told her he already knew. Miguel explained that he, too, had seen things. Deliveries at odd hours, cash changing hands, people who disappeared from their jobs overnight after asking the wrong questions. He warned her that Richard's reach extended further than she imagined. For the first time, Anna realized she wasn't completely alone. But that didn't make her safer. If anything, it meant she was in deeper than ever. Miguel's warnings painted a clearer picture of Richard's empire. A network of restaurants, hotels, and shell companies tied together by deals that thrived in the shadows. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, about keeping everyone in fear so no one dared to expose the truth. Meanwhile, Richard lived in a different world entirely. In his penthouse office overlooking the skyline, he celebrated new contracts and planned expansions. To him, the restaurant incident was already forgotten. But in his arrogance, he missed the subtle shift happening beneath his empire. He had built walls of power around himself, but walls could crack from the inside. Outside the empire's glittering facade, Anna's personal struggles continued. Her mother's health was worsening, and the hospital bills kept rising. The pressure weighed heavily on her, yet it also sharpened her resolve. She wasn't only fighting for dignity anymore, she was fighting for survival. Every secret she uncovered was no longer just a note on paper. It was a lifeline, a possible way to bring down the man who had crushed her and countless others. But danger lurked closer than she knew. The manager had begun to notice Anna lingering near private rooms. A waiter muttered that she asked too many questions. Even Miguel warned her that people were starting to talk. Richard's world was built on silence, and those who broke it often paid a price. Still, Anna pressed on, torn between fear and determination. The cracks in Richard's empire were widening, and she was standing at the edge of something huge. She could sense the storm building, though she didn't yet know how violent it would become, or how many lives it would sweep away when it finally broke. The more Anna uncovered, the more dangerous the ground beneath her feet became. What had started as whispers and scraps of overheard conversations was now forming into a clear picture of Richard Hale's empire, and it wasn't pretty. She discovered shell companies funneling money overseas, restaurants doubling as fronts for hidden deals, and executives covering up financial crimes with forged documents. Every note she scribbled, every detail she pieced together, pulled her closer to the heart of something explosive. But with each step forward, the risks grew sharper. One night, as she left the restaurant after closing, Anna felt it, the unmistakable sense of being followed. The empty street behind her echoed with footsteps that weren't her own. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding, until she ducked into a narrow alley and pressed herself against the wall. A black car rolled slowly past the mouth of the alley, its windows tinted, its engine humming like a predator circling prey. She held her breath until it was gone, realizing just how high the stakes had become. Someone had noticed her. Back at her apartment, Anna spread her notes across the table. The evidence she was gathering wasn't enough yet to destroy Richard, but it was enough to get her in trouble if it ever fell into the wrong hands. She began hiding copies in different places, some at Miguel's tiny apartment, some in an envelope mailed to a trusted friend far outside the city. For the first time, she understood just how powerful Richard truly was. His empire wasn't just about money. It was about fear, surveillance, and control. And she was inching dangerously close to the center of it. Meanwhile, Richard remained blissfully confident. He was preparing for a lavish gala to celebrate another expansion, a night meant to show off his success to investors and politicians. He had no idea that Anna planned to be there, not as a waitress this time, but as someone armed with knowledge that could shake the foundations of his empire. The thought of stepping into his world again made her blood run cold, but she knew it was the only way to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. Miguel begged her to reconsider. He told her stories of others who had tried to speak up against Richard and had vanished, their names erased as if they never existed. "He doesn't just protect his empire," Miguel warned. "He destroys anyone who threatens it." But Anna couldn't turn back now. Every time she remembered Richard's smirk in that dining hall, every time she thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, she knew she had no choice. The night of the gala arrived, and the city glittered under the lights. Wealthy guests in gowns and tuxedos streamed into the grand hall, laughing and sipping champagne, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Anna moved carefully through the crowd, her borrowed dress blending her into the sea of elegance. Hidden in her bag were documents, photos, and recordings, the threads of a story that could unravel everything Richard had built. But as she made her way deeper into the room, her eyes caught something that made her stomach drop. Standing across the hall was one of Richard's most loyal men, staring directly at her. His expression was sharp, suspicious, as if he knew she didn't belong there. For a moment Anna froze. The room seemed to close in around her, the music fading into a distant hum. She realized this was it, the point of no return. The empire was about to be challenged, and Anna was standing on the edge of the storm. One wrong move, and everything she had risked could come crashing down. Yet, if she made the right move, Richard Hale's $2 billion kingdom could crumble before his very eyes. The question now was whether Anna would make it through the night, or whether Richard's power would silence her forever. Anna's pulse hammered in her ears as the man's gaze locked onto hers. For a split second, she thought about turning back, slipping out through the crowd and vanishing into the night. But before she could move, the man raised his glass, gave a subtle nod, and disappeared into the swirl of wealthy guests. The gesture was small, but it left Anna rattled. Was it a warning? Or worse, did he know exactly who she was and what she carried in her bag? She forced herself to breathe, weaving through the glittering hall until she found a quieter corner. From there, she watched Richard step onto the stage. Cameras flashed, music swelled, and he stood tall, his confidence radiating as he boasted about the future of his empire. $2 billion is just the beginning, he declared, his voice smooth and commanding. The crowd cheered, hanging on to every word. To them, he was untouchable. To Anna, he was standing on a crumbling foundation, one she was ready to expose. But then came the twist Anna never expected. As she glanced around the room, her eyes fell on a face that made her chest tighten. Her mother's doctor. Dr. Levin, the man she trusted with her mother's care, was there, laughing and clinking glasses with Richard's top executives. Anna froze. Questions flooded her mind. Why was her mother's doctor here, mingling with the very people she was trying to bring down? Was it a coincidence, or had he been part of Richard's circle all along? The realization shook her. If Dr. Levin was tied to Richard, then her mother's treatment, and her very survival, could be used against her. The empire wasn't just threatening her job anymore. It could reach into the most fragile part of her life. Anna's determination hardened, but so did her fear. Richard's power stretched further than she imagined, touching lives she thought were safe. At the same time, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Miguel had slipped her a small USB drive earlier that week, warning her not to open it until she was ready. In the bathroom of the gala, with her hands trembling, she finally plugged it into her phone. What she found nearly took her breath away. Hidden files, spreadsheets, and voice recordings, all proof of massive fraud, bribery, and secret payoffs. But one name kept appearing in the documents, a name Anna didn't expect, someone in law enforcement. Richard wasn't just protected by money. He had people in positions of power ensuring his empire stayed safe from investigation. That was the second blow. Not only was her mother's doctor tied to Richard, but the very system Anna thought she could turn to for justice might already be compromised. Reporting him could mean walking straight into a trap. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the weight of the revelations pressing down on her. The gala was supposed to be her chance to gather the final proof, but now it felt like she was surrounded on all sides. Every step forward brought more danger, more connections she hadn't seen before. And somewhere out there, Richard's loyal man was still watching, waiting for her to make a wrong move. Anna knew one thing for certain. She was in far deeper than she had ever planned. And if she wasn't careful, this wouldn't just be a fight to bring down Richard's $2 billion empire. It would be a fight to keep herself and her mother alive. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. Anna stepped out of the bathroom, her heart pounding as if the walls of the grand hall themselves were closing in. She knew she had no more time to hesitate. Richard was on stage, glowing under the lights, laughing as the audience clapped and cheered. The empire he bragged about wasn't built on brilliance. It was built on lies. And in her bag, Anna carried the truth that could burn it all to the ground. She moved closer to the stage, weaving between glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos. The USB drive Miguel had given her was more powerful than any weapon. With it, she could expose everything: fraud, bribery, the law enforcement official protecting Richard, and the hidden corruption buried under billions. All she had to do was make it public. Anna's hands tightened around her phone, the files ready to be sent to every major news outlet waiting for coverage of Richard's grand gala. But then Richard's eyes found her. For the first time since that humiliating night at the restaurant, he recognized her. His smile faltered just slightly, but enough to send a ripple of unease through the air. The crowd didn't notice, but Anna did. Richard knew. And suddenly, his voice hardened as he shifted his speech, praising loyalty, condemning betrayal. His words carrying a hidden threat that only she seemed to hear. Before he could act, Anna pressed the button. In seconds, the files were released. Emails, recordings, spreadsheets, all pouring into the inboxes of journalists, regulators, and even rival business magnates who had long suspected Richard's empire wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Phones across the gala buzzed. Screens lit up. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The celebration turned into confusion as guests scrolled through the damning evidence in disbelief. Richard's face darkened, his confidence cracking under the weight of exposure. Cameras captured every second as whispers turned into gasps, and gasps into outrage. His empire, once untouchable, was collapsing in real time before the very people he had sought to impress. Anna stood still, watching the mighty man who had humiliated her crumble under the truth. Security rushed toward her, but before they could reach, Miguel appeared from the crowd, stepping in with a strength she hadn't seen in him before. He wasn't just a dishwasher. He had been waiting years for this moment, quietly collecting his own proof, ready for the day Richard would finally fall. Together, they pushed through the chaos as Richard shouted, his voice drowned out by the storm he could no longer control. But just when Anna thought it was over, the final twist struck. As police arrived and cameras flashed, the law enforcement official whose name appeared in the files stepped into the room, not in handcuffs but flanked by officers. He wasn't there to protect Richard anymore. The exposure had been too wide, too fast. Even his influence couldn't contain it. Instead, he turned his anger on Richard, cutting ties to save himself. Richard's last shield crumbled in an instant. Anna stood at the edge of the stage, breathless, watching Richard Hale being led away as the crowd erupted in a mix of shock and satisfaction. His $2 billion empire was gone, destroyed in a single night, not by rivals or investors, but by the waitress he had once humiliated. Yet as the chaos settled, Anna felt a chill. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You think Richard was the only one? You've just opened the door to something much bigger. The empire had fallen, but the shadow behind it was only beginning to reveal itself. Anna's fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The grand hall was in chaos, yet for Anna, time seemed to slow. She watched Richard being dragged out, his once flawless image shattered, his empire crumbling in the public eye. For a man who had lived on power and intimidation, his downfall was swift and merciless. Cameras caught every angle, journalists flooded the scene, and the same crowd that once cheered for him now turned away in disgust. Richard Hale, the man who humiliated a waitress to prove his dominance, was nothing more than a disgraced figure under flashing lights. Anna stood quietly at the edge, her breath shaky, her heart still pounding from the message that buzzed on her phone. The warning was clear. Richard had been a giant, but not the only one. There were other names, other faces hidden behind the glittering facade of wealth and influence. But for tonight, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was gone, and she had played the role no one expected, a waitress who had dared to fight back. In the days that followed, the story spread everywhere. Headlines carried her name, though she had never asked for recognition. Investigations opened into Richard's businesses, and one by one, his allies began to fall. The law enforcement officer exposed in the files was forced to resign, stripped of power as his own secrets came to light. Investors pulled out, partners distanced themselves, and what had taken decades to build collapsed in weeks. The empire of $2 billion was reduced to dust, proof that even the mighty could fall when truth finally broke through. For Anna, life slowly began to change. The hospital called with good news. Her mother's treatment would be fully covered now, thanks to public donations and support from advocacy groups moved by her story. People she had never met reached out, sending letters, flowers, and words of encouragement. For the first time in a long while, Anna felt seen not for her mistakes or her weakness, but for her courage. Miguel, too, found a new beginning. His quiet bravery was finally acknowledged, and with Anna's help, he was offered a position in an organization dedicated to protecting workers' rights. The dishwasher who had spent years in silence now used his voice to help others. He and Anna often met, not just to share memories of what they had endured, but to remind each other that change always starts with someone willing to take a risk. Yet, the message on Anna's phone never left her mind. It was a reminder that Richard's downfall wasn't the end of the story, only the end of his chapter. Corruption had many faces, and though one empire had been destroyed, there were others waiting in the shadows. Anna knew she could walk away now, live quietly, and focus only on her mother. But part of her also knew that once you've seen the truth, it's hard to unsee it. Still, she chose peace for now. On a quiet morning, Anna sat by her mother's bedside, sunlight spilling into the small hospital room. She held her mother's hand, no longer trembling with fear, but steady with hope. She thought about everything she had lost, everything she had risked, and everything she had gained. Power, she realized, wasn't about money or status. True power was the ability to stand when others tried to silence you. Her journey had started with humiliation, but it ended with dignity. Richard Hale's empire was gone, and Anna had proven that even the smallest voice could shake the tallest walls. The message about something bigger lingered like a shadow in the distance, but for now she let it rest. She had done what no one thought possible. She destroyed a billionaire's empire not with force, but with truth. And as she looked at her mother's smile, fragile but real, Anna knew the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the investigations. It was in reclaiming her humanity, in proving that dignity cannot be stolen when you refuse to give it away. The empire had fallen, and with it, so had the illusion of untouchable power. The story was over, but the lesson would remain. Sometimes the most ordinary person can become the spark that changes everything.